This is Math 6, Lesson 7-6, Percents, Fractions, and Decimals. A percent is a ratio that compares a number to 100. Most students are pretty good at understanding 50%, 30%, 100% when it comes to grades because they know 100% means they got the whole thing right, 50% means they got half of it right, 30% means they better study a lot. We're going to today compare how to change between percents, fractions, and decimals. To write a percent as a fraction, remember, percent means per 100. So to do that, we write the percent as a fraction with a denominator of 100 because that's what percent means, per 100. And then you reduce that fraction to its simplest form. So if I wanted to write 55% as a fraction, I am simply going to take 55 and write it over 100 because that's what 55% means. Now I'm going to reduce this fraction. If I divide by 5, 55 divided by 5 is 11, and 100 divided by 5 is 20. So 11/20 is the same as 55%. 4% as a fraction. Write the 4 over 100 because that's what percent means. I know that 100 is divisible by 4 and 4 is divisible by 4. So if I divide both of these by 4, I get 1/25. Okay, so 4 100ths is 1/25, which is also 4%. 14% as a fraction means 14 over 100. I know to reduce these, I need to divide them by 2. 14 divided by 2 is 7. 100 divided by 2 is 50. So 14% is 7/50ths. Now let's take a look at how we're going to write a percent as a decimal. Remember, percent means per 100. So if I want to change a percent to a decimal, I'm going to take that percent and divide it by 100. But the nice thing about dividing by 100, if I took 1,000 and I divided it by 100, 100 will go into 100 one time. 100 will go into 0 times. So 1,000 divided by 100 is 10. So if I divide it by 100, notice if I have 1,000 and I take a decimal point, because remember the decimal point is always at the end of a number. If I take 1,000 and I divide it by 100, I'm moving the decimal point 2 places to the left. That's how I get 10. Dividing by 100 is the same as moving the decimal point 2 places to the left, which is why that's the rule to change a percent to a decimal. You take your percent, 25%, remove the percent sign. The decimal is normally at the end of the number. Move the decimal point 2 places to the right. So 0.25 is 25% as a decimal. 3% as a decimal would be written as 3 with the decimal point behind it. To move the decimal point 2 places to the left, we get 0.03. I like the leading 0. Does it need to be there? This 0 does not necessarily have to be there. I like to write it. It's just a preferential thing. It's no different than writing 0.03. 126%. The decimal would normally be at the end of the number. Move the decimal point 2 places to the left, we get 1.26. So 126% as a decimal is 1.26. Likewise, if converting from a percent to a decimal, you move the decimal point 2 places to the left, if you want to take a decimal and change it to a percent, you're going to multiply it by 100. And multiplication by 100 is the same as moving the decimal point 2 places to the right. So now I'm going to move my decimal point 2 places to the right. You have to know when you're doing each thing. So I have 0.08 as a percent. I need to write this as a percent. So I have it as a decimal. If I move the decimal point 2 places to the right, I get 8%. 0.16 as a percent. Move the decimal point 2 places to the right, I get 16%. 0.007 as a percent. I move the decimal point 2 places to the right, I get 0.7%. It's a very small percentage. Being able to convert between fractions, decimals, and percents is really, really important because many of the things that you do in mathematics require you to change from one form to another. Now, to write a fraction as a percent, this is probably of all the different conversions, this is probably the most time-consuming. Not the hardest, it's just the most time-consuming. If I want to write 7/20ths as a percent, I need to set it up equal to the proportion of x over 100. So I set my fraction, 7/20 is going to equal x over 100. Now I can either solve the proportion, or if I can recognize right away, like with this problem, I recognize right away that 20 times 5 is 100. So if I multiply 7 times 5, I should get x. So x here would be 35. And if it's a percent, I need to add my percent sign. So 7/20 is 35%. Okay. 7/20 is 35%. 3/8, I can set that up equaling to x over 100, but I can't write really quickly. The last problem, it was easy for me to see that 20 times 5 is 100. I don't know what I can multiply 8 by to get 100. So I'm going to use cross products here. I'm going to solve this proportion by using my cross products again. Okay, remember I told you proportions were going to come in so handy. Okay, so here's my proportion then. I will have 8 times x has got to equal 3 times 100. So 8x equals 300. To get x by itself, I need to divide by 8. So 300 divided by 8. 8 will go into 30 3 times. 8 times 3 is 24, with 6 remaining. Bring down my 0. 8 goes into 60. 8 times 7 is 56, with 4 remaining. Annex an extra 0. Bring my decimal point straight up, and 8 goes into 45 times. So x will equal 37.5%. Or if you wanted to, you could have looked at this and said, oh, 4 over 8 is 1/2, so this is 37 1/2%. Same thing. I don't care if you write it as a decimal or a fraction. As long as the decimal is a terminating decimal. If the decimal ends, you can write it as a decimal. If not, you should write it as a fraction. Either way is acceptable. Let's take a look at the last problem here. We're going to write 5/40ths as a percent. So we take our fraction and we make it equal to x over 100. I don't know what I can multiply 40 by to get 100, so I'm going to use cross products again. So I'm going to multiply 40 times x, and that's got to equal 5 times 100. 40 times x is 40x. 5 times 100 is 500. Divide by 40. X will equal. Now here's a little trick. If I have 500 over 40, I can get rid of one of the zeros on each one of these. So now I'm going to take 4 and I'm going to divide it into 50. That's a little easier. 4 goes into 5 one time. 4 goes into 10 twice. Bring down my 0. 4 goes into 25 times. This would be 12.5. You can do that in math if you did not know that already. If I'm dividing by something, however many zeros, the least number of zeros I have in my problem, I can take that off. I had 1 0 on the bottom and 2 zeros on the top, so I can cross off 1 0 for each. Basically, I divided it by 10. 500 divided by over 40, if I divide both the numerator and denominator by 10, I get 50 over 4. And then that division is a lot easier because it's a lot easier to divide by a single-digit number than it is to divide by a double-digit number. So this is converting between percents and fractions and decimals.